Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars Rebels review. This is going to be my, I suppose, series in review video. I've reviewed all of the individual episodes. The series is now over. I think it's time to at least give some initial kind of thoughts on the series as a whole now that it has come to an end. And I think the first place to start is that I suppose the perspective I'm coming at this from is that I like the series, but I feel it could have been so much better if it was kind of better written, had an overall better direction. So I'll always make it clear that I'm overall positive on Star Wars Rebels, but part of, I suppose, the aim of the video is going to be showing you that there are enough issues with it where I think it goes from being a potentially really good show to where I think I really would only rate the show as just kind of being good. If you forced me to give it like a score out of 10, I'd probably give it a 7.5 in that on average I think it comes out to that, because obviously it had its lower moments where I'd rate it lower and it had its higher moments, and in that sense I feel like 7.5 is fair, is being somewhat generous, and it's not being overly critical. And I think that, as 3/4 of 100, I think that's more or less where it deserves to be. And obviously over the course of this video I'll get into, I suppose, why I feel it has enough weaknesses to kind of bring it down to this level, and where it was strong but maybe wasn't consistently strong in that place. So I suppose the first topic is really just why didn't it reach, I suppose, its potential? And for me, I hinted at it in my review for the finale, and it's just that I feel like the overall premise of the series, what Star Wars Rebels is about at a base level, was never strong enough to really make the full series as meaningful as it perhaps maybe could have been. And it comes down to the fact that it's not a particularly plot-driven show. It doesn't have a ton of continuity between all of its episodes. It's definitely one of those shows where it selectively chooses to kind of suddenly have continuity. Like, these 3 episodes are going to link together because we have an arc. Otherwise, most of the episodes were just, here's a mission for the rebellion, here's the Ghost Crew doing something in this one episode. And that's, for me, where the series sort of falls flat, is when you think about, like, oh, Rebels is over, I'll go back and rewatch it from the start. I think there are so many skippable episodes of Star Wars Rebels. And I think it's kind of count on your hands the number of episodes that are actually, like, important with regards to, like, meaningful character moments or, strong plot elements. And like I think a lot of modern shows, a lot of that comes down to, they tend to start off well with a good premiere, they tend to have a strong mid-season finale, and then they end with a good finale. But the in-between episodes is obviously where the weakness is, and I think that's highlighted in kind of shows like TMNT 2012, which obviously ended a couple of months ago, and it was fairly similar. I think overall Rebels is much higher quality than TMNT 2012, but at the same time Rebels was nowhere near a more kind of plot focused show like, say, a Voltron or an Avatar or a Korra, where nearly every episode of those shows is important in some way, and it's sort of count on your number of hands the number of episodes that aren't important, whereas here it's the opposite. There's only a select few episodes that are actually meaningful to the show overall. And that's absolutely, I think, the main point with regards to why I don't rate Rebels as highly as maybe some people do. As I said, it has its high moments, and I think I'm very glad that this show exists overall. And a positive I will note about the show is that I'm in a way glad that the way the show ended was not with it just being everything's wrapped up. I like that they actually left a decent amount open, because it means that Rebels is not just always going to be about the 75 episodes of Star Wars Rebels. Like, Ezra as a character, Sabine as a character, Ahsoka, they're going to continue in maybe another series or a book series or a comic series, their story is going to be continuing after this, and so it's not just all on Star Wars Rebels. So I appreciate that, but at the same time, it's like, should I praise Rebels for just basically saying, oh yeah, a decent amount of the main characters are going to have their final arcs kind of resolved in a separate series? Is that a positive for Rebels or a negative for Rebels? And so there's a lot of things like that where it's just kind of like they didn't quite hit the mark with it. And getting back to the format of the show, that it isn't particularly continuity like heavy, primarily because the main goal of the show, when you really break it down, is that it is this very slow burn over 4 seasons of gradually building up the Ghost Crew into like a rebel faction on Lothal, and then incorporating them into the larger Rebel Alliance, and kind of giving the Rebel Alliance a kind of a place within the galaxy, and making it kind of big enough to where it is actually like a threat going into Rogue One, going into the original trilogy, and so on. I just felt like the episode to episode kind of exploration of this was where a lot of the series kind of problems came into play, just because so many of the episodes were just very average episodes of like, they're going to, rescue this character who's been captured. They're going to get this design for this, starfighter, or they're testing out this new kind of starfighter for the rebellion, or just little things like that where it's like, okay, I get it that like overall the rebellion is only going to come into fruition. It's only going to happen if these kind of small missions consistently happen. It's just over the course of 4 seasons, watching a large amount of the episodes be these type of things didn't make for the most exciting series overall, because you were trying to sort of have character arcs at the same time as you're kind of gradually building towards the rebellion. But because you had to have these missions all the time, there was never too much of a sense of like you can really truly have a big emotional arc in each episode. And it's sort of demonstrated when you really analyze, I think, the main characters of the Ghost Crew. Of like, Hera got a couple of character focus episodes, but her primary thing was just that she's a very good pilot. And it was only really, I think, right towards the end of the series where they really delved into the relationship with Kanan. And then a little bit earlier on than that, where they referenced her relationship with her father, and I suppose that she, of all of the members, is most, I suppose, related to the rebellion, was where the kind of interest came for her. But for a lot of the early seasons, like, she wasn't the most interesting character. I think Zeb, probably by the end of the show, is the least developed member of the crew, in that his main arc was, okay, they gave him the friendship with Kallus arc, and that kind of came to a pretty nice conclusion. And the rivalry with Kallus about, potentially Kallus destroyed his people, destroyed his planet, turned out to not be the case. But that was kind of really about it. Other than that, you sort of leaned into the gradual friendship forming between Zeb and Ezra, and other than that, he was just the kind of heavy sort of comedic character of the group. Not to say he's a bad character, but they only had a very limited amount of kind of content for him, even though we had 75 episodes of the show. And Sabine, kind of like Hera, they left until fairly late into the series to really delve into her character arcs. They hinted at some stuff in the earlier seasons, but only revealed the full extent of them much later on, where they finally committed to giving Sabine an arc. And thankfully it was a quite good arc, and I suppose an in-depth arc, with the episode where she learned to use a lightsaber, and then they went kind of full on into the Mandalorian stuff. And then I actually did really appreciate that right at the end, they really kind of emphasized how kind of close Ezra and Sabine are, to the point where it sets up Ahsoka and Sabine going after Ezra to find him. That was, I think, a strong thing to do, because a lot of the time you actually hadn't done all that much with Sabine as a character. and she was kind of borderline on the verge of kind of like, wow, they're giving her a lot. Like, she's a Mandalorian, she's a jetpack pack, she can use a lightsaber, she's getting close to being this almost kind of perfect character. And so thankfully, with the lightsaber episodes at the same time, they presented her flaws and her connection with the Imperial Academy and what she actually did there. And then right at the end, they're kind of giving her this mission to kind of basically get her friend back. So that was well done, which leaves obviously the two Force sensitive kind of characters of Kanan and Ezra left. I'll cover Ezra last. Kanan for me is probably like one of the most standout characters from the show, because especially in the early seasons, it felt like they gave him some of the biggest focus moments, in that he got to fight against like the Grand Inquisitor in the finale for Rebel Season 1. His big reveal of like revealing himself as a Jedi after so long of keeping it hidden in the first episode was a great way to start the series off. And him just accepting Ezra as his kind of Padawan, and in the early stages having to adapt to the fact that he's barely just kind of better than the Padawan himself, and is he kind of justified in teaching someone else when he himself has not completed his training. And so they gave him that arc of like kind of connecting with, I suppose, the spirit of the Grand Inquisitor, and kind of finally being knighted as a Jedi. And he had the kind of connection with Yoda, where he kind of, I suppose, learned to accept himself as a teacher. They did some cool stuff with regards to, I suppose, Ezra's maybe kind of fall to the dark side a little bit with Maul, and kind of Kanan kind of being missing for a while as he kind of deals with his blindness and so on, and that being a kind of key development point for him. And then I think, given that he was like the only main character that they full on like killed off, I thought they did it quite well. The only, I suppose, frustration with all of this was that, as much as they attempted to resolve it by basically saying that, you know, Hera was pregnant by the end of the series, I wish we had got a little bit more into, or at least got a little bit more time where it was just Hera and Kanan in an open relationship, and it wasn't like moments before Kanan's death they finally commit to the relationship. That's the sort of stuff I kind of wish they'd fully committed to. But in terms of like a character arc, I felt like he probably had one of the best ones over the course of the entire series. Ezra as the main character is a really weird case for me, because I look at his arc over the course of the 4 seasons, and there's some good stuff, but there's also some confusing stuff. I ultimately feel like they tried to do almost a little bit of everything with Ezra, in terms of like, he's sort of a chosen one, but he's not exactly the chosen one, because that has to be Luke. He's got these special animal powers, but we're going to like forget about them for large periods of time and then only use it when it's important. Here's a sort of fall to the dark side thing, but he never really commits to it. Here's him kind of struggling with like his parents, and we kind of go back from that, then we come back to it. There's a lot going on here, but it sort of feels like kind of false depth of character, in that I don't know if, as the years progress, Ezra is going to be considered in any way on par with like Ahsoka as a character, where like Ahsoka is one of the most popular characters in the Star Wars franchise because of how well done she was in the Clone Wars, and I suppose to some degree how she was done in Rebels as well. I'm not sure if Ezra reaches that level, just because I don't think his arc was as strong as Ahsoka, and as I said, they kind of muddle things a lot by, I think, not really just having a clear-cut arc over the course of the show, where it's just little bits and pieces where like he's sort of one of the leaders of the rebellion in that he's giving the speeches, he's the main connection to Lothal, but then he's fallen to the dark side in this season and is having these sort of connections. He's pseudo chosen one, like in the kind of World Between Worlds episodes, and like Palpatine suddenly has an interest in him in the kind of finale, but we're not exactly sure why. it's a tough situation. I do like the character. I just don't feel he is as strong as some of the other ones. And then just that quick analysis of the whole cast is just kind of like, it shows you that there were moments for sure, but they had 75 episodes, and I don't feel they accomplished as much as they perhaps could have. One thing I feel that was really missing from the series was delving into how the Ghost Crew came to form together. So we saw Ezra, obviously that's the premise of the very start of the series, is Ezra joining the crew. But A New Dawn obviously covers how the book, how Kanan and Hera met. But I think we were missing the details of how Sabine joined them and how Zeb joined them. And I would have loved to have seen like flashback episodes that kind of covered that and showed maybe just Hera and Kanan on their own. I don't even think we know exactly like the order of who joined first. I think it might be Sabine and then Zeb, I think. But even then, I'm not entirely sure if that's the exact case, because I think they referenced it at times with the characters, but it was only like in dialogue. They never really focused on it all that much. But I think that would have been a really cool thing to do, to show the connection here, because especially with Sabine, where we know that she left like the Imperial Academy and has all these kind of issues with her family, that would have been really interesting to know just how much information she gave them beforehand. And especially because in like the first season there was like an episode where we dealt with like Sabine feeling that Kanan and Hera didn't trust her all that much. It kind of led you to believe in a way that she hadn't been with them all that long, and maybe they hadn't given her the responsibility that she deserved at this point. And then Zeb, I think it would have been nice to just kind of say like, yeah, where did this kind of Lasat come into contact with the crew? And I think they've roughly said that like they sort of saved him from the planet because they knew there was like an attack coming or something like that. That's how he escaped. But they didn't go in depth to really make it like a plot point like it could have been. So I think it's little bits and pieces like that where it kind of feels like the structure of the show was like, okay, we have to show the Rebel Alliance forming, but they don't go far enough. We have to show that this show is fundamentally about the Ghost Crew, but we're going to ignore like the origin of the crew coming together. It feels like they never fully committed to like if it's just meant to be a character-driven show or if it's meant to be about the plot of the Rebels. Because as I said with the finale, I found it weird that they specifically mentioned that like the overall Rebel Alliance isn't getting involved in this at all. That I get to a degree it's meant to be this very inspirational thing that basically just the Ghost Crew and their friends and initial allies can accomplish what they did on Lothal. But I feel like it did the overall series kind of in a way a little bit of a disservice by not showing the sort of inspirational nature of the Ghost Crew Rebel kind of cell on the overall Rebel Alliance. Skipping basically from the end of the battle to basically, oh, Endor happens, Luke's whole journey happens, the original trilogy happens, here's what the aftermath is at the end of the original trilogy. It was this weird thing of like, did you not just kind of skip past what the entire series was like leading towards in a way, by not showing the core impact of this massive victory on the Rebel Alliance? Even if it was just this kind of more subtle thing of just showing the morale of the Rebel Alliance kind of being boosted and maybe them joining together and hinting that like now there is suddenly open warfare and it's a little bit more even than you'd expect. It's not just random small battles going on. So there's bits and pieces like that I think were kind of a struggle. I think positives with the series are that like I actually think it was great that they kind of used this series to kind of give Maul the end of his arc. And as much as I really am not a fan of the way they approached doing the final battle with Obi-Wan and Maul and in terms of how short it was, again, I'll say I don't feel it needed to be like a 10, 20-minute battle or anything like that. I just feel like you could have done 2-3 minutes of a little battle and just have a little bit of a story be told as like Maul goes in expecting Obi-Wan to be the kind of disheveled one, but the truth of the matter is that kind of he's that way. And they sort of do it in how they approach it, but I feel it was a little bit too like the writers trying to be a bit too clever by basically going like, oh yeah, you know, they know each other so well. You know, the fight basically happened in their heads, and when it really came down to it, Obi-Wan was just so much better. It's just like, I felt like that's an explanation that works a little bit better on paper than it does in practice. But I will praise the show overall for what they did with Maul and actually giving him a conclusion as a character. In the same way that, like, if the Clone Wars had continued into a few more seasons, we would have got to see the end of Ventress as a character. So I like that they did that. I like that they brought Ahsoka back and made her feel very important. The moment where she obviously learned that Anakin was Vader and the kind of setup over the course of, I think, season 2 towards that was well done. And then I think with the sort of surprising stuff they did more towards the end of, like, through time travel, Ezra saved Ahsoka from Vader, and she's now returning the favor to Ezra by, like, finding him now that he's sort of missing. And I think that's a really cool way to kind of keep her arc going and potentially return her and make her one of the main characters in some sort of a new story going forward. That is a really cool idea for me, because it's not just wrapping up a character who sort of needs to be wrapped up. It's acknowledging that Ahsoka has got to the point now where she is a fan favorite character, and you're giving her the send-off that they feel she deserves. And I think that's well done. And they're also, I suppose, incorporating, like, Sabine into that to give more of the Rebel cast, like, a chance to shine as well. Obviously, we don't know the full extent of what exactly they're doing next, but it looks like there will be some sort of a new animated show announced at some point, and it'll probably relate to this in some way. It's just, I suppose, I suppose it's more about, like, I don't think they're just going to announce a series that is literally just like the Sabine and Ahsoka show as they directly go after Ezra, because that almost feels like too focused in terms of a plot to actually devote an entire series to. So I kind of feel like they have to do almost sort of anthology style and just be like, okay, we're set after episode 6, and here's a bunch of stories of important things that happen, and going after Ezra, what happens to Thrawn is one of them. So I like that. I suppose, speaking of Thrawn, I liked that they brought him into the series. I think he is a really good character. I do feel that the show never used him as well as the book. He had his moments for sure. I suppose the best moment for him ultimately was the season 3 finale, but he never felt as interesting of a character as he did in his own book. So I'm thankful, of course, that they kind of have revealed that Thrawn is alive, that they're not committing to kind of that killed him, that it means that he's still out there, they could do stuff with him potentially much later on in the series, and that's cool, and I hope they kind of finally give him some sort of a big arc in potentially whatever series comes next. And that's a positive, sort of like I said about Ahsoka, like and Sabine. Like, it's cool that they didn't just wrap everything up. There's stuff that can still continue going forward, and Thrawn being one of them is cool. But it is also a factor of just he never felt as kind of amazing as he did in the books, because they constantly always had to have, like, the Rebel crew get away from him, so they kind of diminished him a little bit by always having him sort of lose, but kind of keeping him enough out of the action to where, like, okay, he lost, but he wasn't really present there as much in this plan, so, like, you can't blame it on him. There was all these kind of, like, caveats about, like, oh yeah, he hasn't been properly defeated just yet. So, like, there was that. Like, the Inquisitors were cool initially. I wish they had explored a little bit more of the origin of them. I think after, like, the first, couple, they just felt like just random characters for like Maul to kill off with like some of the later ones. And I wish we had just overall delved a little bit more into depth in terms of just like the nature of who they are, what they are, and so on. You know, the use of characters like Vader, I think they used him as much as they needed to in the series, of just like basically in just season 2 with like the Ahsoka stuff, and that's really it for him. Palpatine, I appreciated bringing like the big bad into play at the end to kind of show that this series does have some impact on the greater galaxy, that Ezra is enough of a threat that Palpatine feels he needs to make some moves. Again, I don't think it quite had the impact of some of like the Emperor's appearances from like the Clone Wars, where he just comes in and like takes out Maul and a press. That is like one of the best moments from like Clone Wars. But it still, I think, he was used, I think, well enough. So I suppose coming towards the end of this, as I said, I like the series. I think the problem with it is always going to be, like, if you go to rewatch this series, I think like a good probably like 60% of the episodes probably are fairly skippable if you do a rewatch of them. And because of the way this series is kind of formatted, where, as I said, it's very much a premiere mid-season finale type show, where all of the big events tend to happen in those episodes, and then maybe there's 1 or 2 notable episodes in the gaps. Whereas I think with the Clone Wars always had a case of like, because it's very arc focused, it was always a case of like, okay, there are 4 good arcs this season and maybe 1 or 2 bad arcs, and it's just really clear that like, this is a good season because I like a lot of the arcs here. This is a not great season because most of the arcs I didn't particularly like. But because it was done in that way, there was so much variety between the different arcs that there was always something different and probably something to suit you. Here, it wasn't really done that way. There of course is differences with the seasons, and that like the last season is very Thrawn focused. Like Maul is kind of like a lot of what season 3 is about, especially towards the end. Ahsoka tends to, with Vader, is like a key focus of season 2. But then when you really break it down, like, Maul's only in a handful of episodes, Ahsoka's only in a handful of episodes. So most of the episodes were just, as I said before, those rebel supply run missions. Let's save this hostage character, let's help out this character, make this little connection, we'll get this fleet of ships, we'll take out this sort of important Imperial supply chain thing. Bits and pieces like that. And I think that's where some of the weakness comes in, of like, those episodes never quite did enough to really get across the idea of like, these episodes are why, when we get to the end of the series and into the original trilogy, like, the rebels are the way they are because of a lot of the missions that our Ghost Crew like actually made happen. They never quite connected it in that way. I suppose in the later seasons they tried to incorporate some of that with like the Saw Gerrera stuff, and how that links into like Rogue One with the Kyber Crystal stuff, and hinting towards the Death Star and like Krennic and so on, Tarkin towards the end. But outside of that, which I think ultimately in the end are just kind of Easter eggy type moments to make a bigger connection and show that everything is related, that's really what it came down to. I think a major weakness I found was especially the last season, was kind of like the TIE Defender thing. It felt like the mention of TIE Defenders and the fact that like if these come into production, we're gone, was such a it was a plot point mentioned in so many episodes, and by the end it was just dismissed like that. It just felt like, this is the big thing that will destroy the rebels on Lothal if it happens, and then just like poof, it's kind of gone, or it's not a focus anymore, and that's it. That kind of felt like, what's going on here? And you know, to a degree I like that they sort of mention that like the Emperor like has a couple of major plans. One of them is the TIE Defender, one of them is like the Death Star. He's not really sure which one to choose, and Governor Pryce's actions in the finale, killing Kanan, is ultimately what ruins Thrawn's plans, and obviously makes him side more with the Death Star as being the better project. So to me, that's where Rebels kind of really fell kind of flat, of just not enough episodes that were meaningful enough, not enough episodes that really, I think, got the characters across in the way they needed to. And I think what they need to learn going into a potential follow-up animated series is it needs to be more plot focused. When you do character arcs, actually make them arcs. Try it as best as possible to not have as many just kind of one-off random mission episodes. That's, I think, what we really need going forward. More meaningful episodes that really get us to where we kind of want to go. And that's where I kind of want the format of the show to be a little bit more like an Avatar, like a Korra, like a Voltron, where episodes that go away from like the main plot or the main character arc they're the rare ones. Whereas what we have at the moment in Rebels is a show that only rarely got away from the random mission episodes to tell an important story. So that's my big hope in terms of like what will be sort of a defining choice for whatever they do next is about the format of the show, and if they choose to be very continuity driven, or if they decide to make it more kind of episodic and just like, yeah, there'll be fun every episode, there'll be like a fight every episode because we'll have like a little mission every episode that will be accomplished. We need more kind of arcs, things that take place over a bunch of episodes, and plot points that can be set up in earlier seasons that can then be sort of like activated later down the line and are kind of allow for shocking moments, kind of setup moments, and kind of cool moments as the series progresses. They sort of need to blend aspects of Clone Wars with Rebels to just make, I think, an overall better series. And I think if it is set post Episode 6, they have the bonus of not needing to do the build up the rebellion thing, in that they can be more like just do what we want in a very open section of the kind of lore that we don't have a lot of details about what happens immediately post Episode 6. So that's my hopes there, and I'll just end by saying that as I said, for me, Rebels is a good show. When season 4 comes out, I will be getting it on Blu-ray to kind of complete my collection. It's a show that, I'll at least go back and rewatch certain episodes, kind of certain groups of episodes, like the Sabine arc with the kind of Mandalore stuff is definitely one I want to go back and watch. If I remember correctly, the season 1 finale, like Fire Across the Galaxy, I believe it was called, that's a good episode. Kallus, even though his arc is very spread out across the entire series, I think it was a well done arc where you had the Zeb and Kallus episode where they were stranded on the same planet, and that directly led to, I suppose, like Kallus kind of being fulcrum in the later season and them having to kind of get him out and join the Alliance. That was, I think, one of the few examples in Rebels of a very well done arc set over a bunch of episodes that they didn't even need to focus on all that much, but that you had people invested in. And the reason people were invested in it was because you set it up. You didn't just immediately resolve it. You allowed it to sort of linger for a while and basically have people speculate about how it could play out or not play out and so on. So the Kallus arc was a good one. The Sabine arc, I think, worked well because you went from being very vague about her character to suddenly being like, here's a lot of details about what's going on here. So there are strong moments in this series. It's just that it didn't have them enough. It was enough to where I say that this series is a good series. I'd recommend, if you haven't seen Rebels, to watch it. It's just that I would almost recommend, like, if you don't like the look of an episode description, maybe skip the episode. I'd be very much kind of like, don't watch every single episode of this. Skip if you feel that it's not going to be a particularly interesting episode. So as I said, 7.5 out of 10 is really where I'd place the series, which, as I said, I think is fair. It's not being overly critical on it to placing it in maybe like an average tier, but it's also not, I think, over exaggerating the show's kind of strong moments when most of the show wasn't as strong as, you know, the maybe 10 really good episodes of the show. So that's where I'd place it. I think Clone Wars is overall a better series than this because I think it had more meaningful episodes more often than this. And I think for me as a reviewer, that's something that I'm fairly consistent with when I review shows. It's that kind of just that kind of fraction of like how many episodes I consider to be meaningful from the entire series is a big factor in terms of how good the series was overall. And Rebels, I think, came up a little short on that with how many episodes were actually kind of notable. But in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on Rebels overall. Do you think it's a really good show, or was it just kind of okay? What do you think its biggest strengths were, its biggest weaknesses, and just your thoughts on what I had to say overall in this. I think the biggest thing I was really trying to accomplish in this video was to not let the hype around the finale influence my thoughts on the show overall, because I think the finale is very good, but you have to look at the overall show, including the start of this season plus the other 3 seasons, and suddenly I think that brings down from a very high mark of the finale where the overall show is. But the finale is good enough to where I think probably the finale kind of put the show from being maybe a 7 to being that 7.5. Maybe it could go into an 8 depending on when I do rewatches and so on. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Star Wars Rebels. I may do other videos kind of when I feel like I need to on Rebels, but that's probably it for a while with Rebels. Maybe you guys could suggest other videos I maybe should do with Rebels. But yeah, that's my thoughts on the show overall. In the comments, as I said, give me your thoughts on Rebels as a series. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.